Hi all, and welcome to our CRP Professional Development Series. And this session is on BVLOS Operations A to Z, your complete guide. So my name is Jackie Dumovich, and I'm the CEO and founder of Hover UAV. Oh, looks like we've got some technical. And I will be your host and your moderator here today. It's really hard to believe, but Hover UAV turns 10 in just a few weeks. And with that milestone coming, I've been doing a lot of reflecting on how far the industry has come. Over the last decade, we've seen so many massive changes of technology, regulation, and what's even possible with uncrewed systems. And with all of this moving so fast, we're so grateful that we've been able to be a part of so many on this session's journey, from offering general advice through to helping with approvals, or just being part of their day-to-day operations. This CRP Professional Development Series is something that I've been really excited and passionate about over the last year. It's giving chief remote pilots the tools and knowledge and confidence to stay ahead of the curve and then take all of that knowledge back to their teams and share it with their entire organisation. Our hope is being a part of today's journey will help you understand a little bit more about BVLOS, some of the complexities, or often it's sometimes not complex, understanding a little bit about concept of operations, developing safety cases, to what it looks like from flight tests to daily operations as well. So today, as mentioned, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers, all with a completely different perspective, but all part of the BVLOS journey. So we have, and I will do a proper introduction just before they speak, but we do have Dylan Bishop from Hover UAV. We have Andrew Tridgell, who wears multiple hats, but he's here today talking about some of his projects he's working with ANU, but obviously a lot of us on the call would know him from his work at Ardupilot as well. And we also have a BVLOS pilot and surveyor technician from Whitehaven Coal, Jessica Irwin, joining us. So let's dive in with our first speaker. So I'd like to introduce Dylan. Next to me. Dylan has been the writer for some of Australia's largest and most complex BVLOS approvals. He has extensive knowledge of the SOAR methodology and building a BVLOS safety case. He plays a key role in shaping regulatory success for many award-winning projects. Today, he'll kick off the webinar by walking us through how to get started from developing that solid concept of operations that you require through to building a robust safety case for BVLOS approval. Welcome, Dylan.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and hello everyone I know and everyone joining for the first time. So I am going to try and condense down what I normally spend about 4 hours talking through in our SOAR overview course to about 10 minutes here. So I will try and keep things brief. Jackie, feel free to yell at me if I start rambling on about something too much. So what I'm going to try and cover for you guys today is just a bit of information through the ConOps and the safety case development phase, but we will touch a bit on everything. So to start with, when you're looking at BVLOS, particularly in Australia or New Zealand, we are currently assessing it on an area-by-area basis. So there aren't wide area approvals at the moment where you can operate kind of anywhere in Australia, although there is a bit of movement on that case. You do need to know a bit about what you want to do heading into a BVLOS approval as well. So knowing the RPA you want to use, the area you want to operate in, and the task you want to accomplish is very important to know at the onset. All right, so there may be some additional limitations to your BVLOS case as well, depending on the task that you're doing. So that is something to remember. The S in SOAR does stand for specific. So when we talk about your task specifics, you may have some extra limitations based on what you want to accomplish. At the moment, you'll be following the JARIS SOAR 2.0 methodology in Australia, with JARIS SOAR 2.5 coming soon, hopefully. And there are a variety of NAAs around the globe that have adopted different parts of 2.5 or taken it on wholesale. For the time being in Australia, though, we are using 2.0 and the current TMI guidance, which does take some information from 2.5. So to begin with, I just want to give you an overview of what is the actual process of getting a BVLOS approval, because there's a few steps to it outside of just developing your ConOps and your SOAR safety case. So the first step is having a REOC or an equivalent in another organisation, such as a Part 102 certificate or for New Zealand. And once you have that existing REOC, you also want to make sure that you have appropriately qualified staff. So you don't necessarily need to start with everyone having a BVLOS Octopass or an IREX or anything like that. But you do want people who are qualified on the RPAs and have a bit of experience heading into it. The next step is what I'll be talking about mostly today, which is developing your SOAR safety case and your ConOps. So that's where you'll develop your concept of operations, determine the SAIL level for your individual task, and then you'll have OSO and containment levels to meet as well, which is what kind of changes in your manual or your exposition in terms of procedures. The next step will be compiling all of that information, so your updated manual, your SOAR safety case, maps of the area and risk assessments, and actually putting that application into the, CASA or to the CAA in New Zealand, for instance. There's a few forms that go along with each of those applications, and it really is just bundling all of that up and getting it in. Probably one of the most important things that we do want to note too is that almost any NAA will give you an estimate that you need to pay for your work, and you generally don't enter the queue to have your assessment assessed by them until you've paid that that estimate to begin with. The next phase is the really good time while you're waiting in the queue to do your BVLOS training if you haven't already. So that's where you'd attend a BVLOS Octa course and then go and get that qualification, or perhaps the IREX or whatever the equivalent happens to be. Once you have gone through the queue, you'll actually reach an inspector or an assessor, and they will then go through your BVLOS safety case with you, and they'll provide you anything they think in terms of feedback to be updated across your BVLOS safety case, your area at risk, and also your procedures. And they're really working with you there to meet a standard where they can confidently sign you off and say, okay, you're ready to start flying, which then leads into doing your actual flight assessment. So if you've already got a BVLOS case, you won't need to do a second one in most cases. But if it's your first time, you will actually need to do a flight assessment with the regulator. So they'll be doing that in field, and the expectation for that assessment is that you kind of have everything ready like you're doing a regular job. So you'd have your full JSA, your full workflow to then present to the inspector as if you were just going about a regular BVLOS flight, and then they'll be going through and ticking you off as competent or not competent. And then last but not least, they'll actually issue you your instruments so you can start flying on your own in your full BVLOS area. And your last step will just be updating your manual to include that instrument itself and any final procedural changes that may have come out from your flight test. So that's kind of the start to end of doing the application. And now I just want to talk a little bit more about the specifics around building up your ConOps and what all of kind of the things I just mentioned are. So to start with, your concept of operations should be made up of the organization that you're a part of, what you intend to accomplish, so what your task is, the RPA that you're intending to use, where you intend to operate, what that defined area of risk is, and then it goes into the description of what you found in that area of risk from an air and ground point of view. So to give you an idea of what that looks like when we talk about this concept of operations, to start off with, the description of your task is important to the regulator so that they can properly assess that the procedures you have and the area you're operating in align with an acceptable level of risk, and you have the capability to manage that. The other part, and we talk about this, knowing your RPA early on is really important. So you'll see an example here of kind of the key stats behind a few very commonly used RPAs. So these stats, things like airspeed, its performance, its behavior in a safety scenario, will actually inform the area that you can fly in, and it'll create volumes that we refer to as the contingency volume and ground risk buffer. So those are going to be important elements in your safety case. So knowing the RPA you want to use early on is very important, and being able to stick to it and not change it too late in the game is also very important. So the area at risk is the next part of your operations. So you want to make that up of the area you need to fly, which we call the flight geography. So in this example here, that's everything in the green area. So in the green area, you want to put everything you need to get the task done. So you need to be able to comfortably operate from start to finish within there. The yellow or orange volume is the contingency volume. So those key stats about your RPA, what it does in an emergency scenario when it hits a geofence, etc., will inform your contingency volume and how much space you effectively need to bring that RPA back into your flight geography. And then lastly, you have your ground risk buffer, which is informed by what will happen if you flight terminate. So if you cross your contingency volume under the SOAR methodology, there is a need for you to conduct a flight termination. And when you do that, the ground risk buffer is meant to be representative of where that RPA could land in a worst case scenario. So it's as high as it can be, it's as fast as it can be, it's gliding, it's spiraling, whatever its termination behavior is. So what I mentioned earlier in terms of key RPA stats, that'll inform how these additional volumes look. And this whole area from your ground risk buffer in becomes your area at risk. The next part of that ConOps is then talking about what's actually in your air and ground risk. So you need to look from that ground risk buffer in what's on the ground that's at risk in terms of population density, what kind of infrastructure is there. And then from the airspace point of view, you need to be looking at how dense that airspace is, what its relationship is to how high you're flying, and what might be passing through your airspace. So some of the tools you might use there is obviously SOAR, which is kind of a combination of all of these things amongst air and ground risk, and some individuals like Landscan, which pulls from the ABS and NSAID stats data to give you the average population density. You'd also use things like departure and approach procedures published by NAAs, for example, CASA. And then obviously services like Oz Runways and other electronic flight bags can be really helpful to actually put in the KML, and then you can see it as an overlay on the airspace map, which is very handy. And it's also very good for the regulator as well. So once you actually know what's within your area at risk, you will work through the SOAR process to determine an intrinsic ground risk class and an initial air risk class. You'll then be able to apply some mitigations to bring those levels down. And then once you've done that, you'll have a final ground risk class and a residual ground risk class. These combine to make your overall SAIL level. So at the moment, SAIL 2 operations are very common in Australia, and that kind of looks like, for the most part, using smaller RPAs, areas where the population density typically doesn't exceed around 500 people per square kilometre, and airspace environments like under 500 feet or above 500 feet in very remote Australian airspace or areas where aircraft typically don't operate. So what you're really looking for in that kind of SAIL 2 environment is, for example, an area that's devoid of flight paths, or you have good altitude separation from them, and kind of a ground risk environment that you're either in control of or doesn't exceed kind of the population of a small town. Lastly, I do want to touch on SOAR 2.5 and the ground risk TMI as well. So SOAR 2.5 is coming. It's expected to be accepted by more NAAs this year, but there is a caveat to that, is that some NAAs may only take partial implementations. That's kind of one of the most important factors of SOAR, is what the National Aviation Authority thinks is very important to the whole process. So they don't often just take the whole SOAR methodology and say it's just that. They're going to put their unique spins on it across the world to suit their individual risk environments. And also in Australia at the moment, there is currently a temporary management instrument that provides you guidance to do your ground risk assessment under SOAR 2.0. And it gives you a lot more options than what SOAR 2.0 had in terms of the ground risk. And it also defines it with both a number value and a qualitative assessment as well, which gives you a description of what that expected area should look like. So you'll definitely need to be referencing this TMI if you're doing a case in Australia specifically.
Yeah, look, I'm going to just jump in super quickly. So, the regulatory roadmap, CASA, had a meeting a few weeks. I'm sure a lot of you were on that. And I actually do sit on that working group. So a lot of the feedback I took, they obviously sort of mentioned that, November we're expecting, but I'm like, we need to know, do we start writing now? Do we wait until November? What is that process? Because obviously it's time consuming and costly to you if you created a version 2 today, but then next week you have to change that and redo everything. So that's been my feedback, that from industry to CASA, and I do believe that they will try to give guidance over the coming months of when we should start transitioning, when we start putting the applications in, and what happens if, you know, you've done everything to 2, but you don't get to put it into November, what will happen? So yeah, hopefully that guidance comes out in the next month or so.
Yeah, hopefully. And just before we hand over to Andrew, I will just say I do apologise for speaking quite quickly. As I mentioned, SOAR is a very dense, large topic. We do have a SOAR overview course that's a lot longer if you want to attend that, and there's plenty of resources on Hover's website as well to help you understand the individual components a bit more.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dylan. And I can't believe you actually kept a full SOAR and building safety into 10 minutes, which usually does take a lot longer. Our next speaker is someone that I have a huge amount of respect for, Andrew Tridgell. Andrew wears multiple hats, and he probably has all these different hats there to put on, but and in my opinion is one of the brightest minds in the industry. Every time I call him, I walk away in awe and often thinking, geez, I have so much still to learn about the industry. He's been deeply involved in the ANU drone program, working across flight testing, planning, research and system integration, all while bringing all of his, you know, knowledge from his other operations like his software lens to the table. His wealth of knowledge in systems and software development, he really understands how critical it is to know your systems, not just to fly them, but to understand them in its entirety. Today we have a chance to pick his brain a bit, from software preparation ties into safe operations to why deep technical understanding is essential for your BVLOS operations. Welcome, Andrew, and I believe he might have some support from some other ANU staff as well.
Yes, I'm not sure if Peter and Michelle managed to make it along, but thank you very much, Jackie.
Sure.
Great. Okay, all working. All right. So yeah, so like Dylan, this is a big topic. I have many times had calls that go for 3 or 4 hours with a new Ardupilot partner company who's starting to do BVLOS, where I'm going through, you know, particular considerations for their aircraft and their situation or what type of, you know, geography and things they're flying in. So this is going to be a very quick overview, which hopefully gives you a bit of an idea of what you might be getting into. It is focused on Ardupilot, and the background is a project at ANU that we've got, the Australian National University in Canberra, the ANU Scout Drone Project. This is a project to use BVLOS VTOL fixed wing aircraft to rapidly confirm lightning ignitions using thermal cameras in Namadgi National Park. So the idea is to be able to have flights happening at short notice over long range sort of 90 kilometers or so, you know, from takeoff point to the furthest point potentially, supporting emergency services by providing rapid data on new fires. And the project's been going for a few years now. And we've only just got our BVLOS instrument quite recently, and a huge thank you to Hover and to Dylan in particular for all their support in the regulatory side of getting our instrument. So this is the flight area for this particular project, and just like Dylan described, it's got your sort of flight geography there, and then the contingency volume and the ground risk buffer around the outside. You can also see a number of sort of no-fly zones around particular areas where the population density rises above the required threshold for avoidance. And I'll just flick over actually. If I switch to Google Earth, can you see the Google Earth tab now? I think if I share this tab now, has that come across?
Yep.
Yep, great. So it might be just a little bit easier to see it in here, a bit better rendered. So there's a number of sort of stay out zones here, and these vary with which particular aircraft we're flying. We have multiple aircraft that we've got our instrument for, and there's some particular complexity around this area crossing a river that I'll talk a bit more about later. And there's also multiple height limitations. So there's steps because of the controlled airspace steps around Canberra Airport, you can sort of see those big blue rings there for the controlled airspace steps. We're flying OCTA, so outside of controlled airspace, which means that our flight needs to stay within the AMSL limits in these various regions of this area that we're allowed to fly in. So I'll pop back to the other tab and move on. So these are the types of aircraft that we're flying. The big yellow one at the top is a Carbonics Atano. We're not flying that anymore at the moment. There was a technical issue with that aircraft, so we're not flying it at the moment. This was a Carbonics Volante. The main aircraft I've been flying recently is the one on the bottom right, which is a Race Griffin Pro, which we've found, by the way, to be absolutely fantastic aircraft. If you're looking for a BVLOS capable aircraft, I'd highly recommend talking to a Race. We've found it to be a brilliant aircraft for these sort of operations. And there's also an Race Angel, which is a very long range multi-rotor in the bottom of the page there. Most multi-rotors are sort of half-hour flight time. This one you could fly for a couple of hours on battery. And so we've been flying all of these different aircraft, but concentrating in recent times mostly on the Griffin Pro and the Race Angel. So some of the key considerations when considering flying BVLOS with Ardupilot, the handling of terrain, you need to be very well aware of how to make the most of your mission planning tools and how you're going to do your flight monitoring with regards to terrain. When you're flying line of sight, it's easy to see if you're approaching a tree or approaching a hill or whatever. And obviously when you're BVLOS, you have to make sure you've got the appropriate monitoring tools. And I'll show you a demonstration of some of those in a minute. You need to make sure your situational awareness is up to scratch. So, you know, which involves things like looking at the weather forecast ahead of time, which is, you know, should be part of your checklists, which again, I'll show in a minute. Using things like ADS-B in and or Flight Radar 24 for monitoring of other users of the airspace to make sure that you're not impinging on your instrument, and your operations manual that you'll develop will have requirements for taking actions if you come within a certain, you know, horizontal distance or vertical distance of another aircraft. So you need a way to monitor that. And I'd highly recommend that as much as possible of these considerations you automate. And again, I'll give a bit of a demonstration of that in a minute. It is a good idea, for example, to have automated traffic warnings set up on your vehicle. So if another aircraft does come within the threshold distances, that you automatically get a voice warning. Our particular one, we've got it set up just to give a traffic warning. So it starts saying traffic, you know, every 5 seconds, and that makes sure the operator who might be got a bit sleepy after 4 hours of flying wakes up and makes sure they look very carefully at what action they might take. FPV video feeds can be a very important part of your situational awareness too, and again, I'll demonstrate those in a second. Your contingency planning is absolutely critical. You need to think about things like alternative landing sites, so pre-planned landing sites in case of things like equipment failure or sensor failures, loss of GPS, loss of airspeed. Decide in advance what you're going to do for those and pre-plan alternative landing sites, have them as part of your mission so that you can switch to an alternative landing site rapidly in case you lose, for example, forward propulsion. Very careful consideration of all of your fail-safe actions and testing of those fail-safe actions. Ground station display suitable for BVLOS. The sort of ground station display that most people use may not be suitable for BVLOS operations. We've got a custom ground station display, all open source if you want to use it, but it's heavily customized for our application. And again, I'll give a demonstration on that in a minute. As much as possible with automated warnings for the various avionics and external failures and external dangers. Integration of ADS-B sources directly into the ground station is a very good idea. And, oh, I didn't even finish the sentence there. A backup GCS. So we fly with always 2 GCS at least connected. So we have 2 GCS operators so we can switch to the backup. The importance of a backup GPS was actually illustrated during our test flight with the CASA inspector standing next to us. My laptop went crazy. My laptop was the primary ground station. And in the middle of our BVLOS test flight, my laptop decided to misbehave. And I could just immediately switch to our backup GCS during the flight, and just a couple of seconds and I was on the backup, and our second GCS operator, Peter Barker, walked across to my GCS. So we just switched places. We could have just had Peter in charge. He's qualified to operate the aircraft, but I decided to take over the backup GCS, and then he moved across and sorted out my laptop, and then we switched back later in the flight. And the CASA inspector was, very approving of the fact that that worked, an unplanned outage of one of our ground stations. So good idea to have that sort of thing. Terrain handling, there's lots of considerations regarding terrain, particularly in the sort of area that we're flying in with some quite steep terrain. There's certainly areas that are where the terrain is steeper than the maximum climb rate that our aircraft can achieve, which makes mission planning to avoid trying to fly up the side of a mountain very, very important. You need to choose whether you are going to set up your waypoints as terrain relative waypoints or above mean sea level waypoints. I wouldn't recommend using above home waypoints. Far better to use AMSL or terrain relative, or you might have a mix. We've been using a mixture of terrain relative and AMSL waypoints for our application. Terrain following is likely to use more battery fuel because it's going to start following the contours of the terrain, which means it's going to be climbing and descending more than it would with long distance AMSL waypoints. But obviously it simplifies the mission. You can have waypoints that are many kilometers apart that automatically climb over intermediate terrain. You should preload all your terrain data to the micro SD card using the terrain.ardupilot.org system, and choose your, the resolution of your terrain tiles depending on your geography. Make sure you're very carefully set up your terrains and fail safe, making sure you're using the do land start system, which is, it's too complex for me to describe it right here. I'd say go to the wiki documentation for do land start to understand how that's used. Civil testing, software in the loop testing is absolutely essential. Don't take off with a mission without having tried that mission in the simulator. You should learn how to set up your simulator to match the characteristics of your real aircraft so that the civil behavior, particularly with regards to climb rates, turn rates, speed, etc., matches your real vehicle. And you should then do confirmation test flights within EVLOS or VLOS to confirm that it does indeed match the real vehicle, so that your simulation testing is a good test of the real behavior. And you should learn how to test fail-safe behaviors, low battery fuel, GCS fail-safe, RC fail-safe, EKF, GPS failures, etc. Try all of those in a simulator first, because it's much cheaper to restart the simulator than buy a new aircraft. Make sure you have a plan for how you respond to each of these types of fail-safe behaviors, and also be careful about the time to descend and battery level. I've seen people doing very high altitude BVLOS missions where they forgot that when they come back at 800 or 900 meters and they then do a VTOL landing, slowly coming down from 800 meters in VTOL, you're likely to run out of battery, and the last part of your landing will likely be far more rapid than you had intended. So make sure that you set up your flight plan to do, for example, a spiral descent in fixed wing with the final descent only of the last 60 to 80 meters as a VTOL landing. Make sure you look at radio view sheds from your SITL logs to make sure you're going to get good radio coverage. Depending on the type of C2 link you've got, you can do automatic analysis of those. Again, it's a bit beyond the scope of such a short session that we've got here, but there are techniques for automatically looking at radio view sheds from log files to ensure that you're going to get a good radio link. Vehicle testing, make sure you do line of sight testing and try as many fail safes as you can while you're in line of sight so a safety pilot can take over. So for example, the first time you go out of RC controller range should not be when you're heading off on your first BVLOS mission. You should make sure that your aircraft is going to behave sensibly when your transmitter is turned off or goes out of range. Make sure that it's going to behave sensibly when you power down your ground station, shut down your C2 link, make sure it does something sensible. So test all of that while you're still within line of sight. You test it first of all while you're on the ground. You can check the correct behavior. You can also use a system called Sim-on hardware, which allows you to run the Ardupilot CITL simulator directly on the flight controller where the simulation is running within the flight controller itself. That can be very useful because it allows you to do things like turn off using the real RC transmitter and the real ground station. And then you can try failing those, turning them off on the ground while you're flying a simulated mission on the real aircraft, and even get it to spin motors and move control surfaces and things in that testing. Again, I can't teach you all right now how to do that, but you could approach me later to learn how to do that or read it on the Ardupilot wiki. Test things like propulsion, fail-safes in line of sight, and GPS and airspeed sensor loss. If you want to be able to cope with those, make sure that dead reckoning works appropriately on your vehicle. Altitude limits and geofences. The Ardupilot has quite flexible, altitude limits and geofences, but not flexible enough for many BVLOS operations. It wasn't nearly flexible enough for ours. So this is where you do customized geofences and altitude limit handling. So we've developed our own custom ones. All of our work is open, so you can look at what we've done. We've developed, for example, a Python script that converts our KML instrument into a Lua script that can be loaded into the flight controller. So we take the instrument, the KML file that we've got from CASA that specifies all our altitude limits, and it automatically converts that across to a Lua script. The Lua script is running directly on the flight controller, and that means we can ensure that we are obeying all of those different altitude limits, both AMSL and AGL. We have a mixture of altitude limits in our instrument. So we have some AMSL and some AGL, and some areas are actually both. We are at the maximum of the AGL and AMSL in some areas, and you can handle all of that with this type of KML to Lua conversion. I'll just show you briefly what that looks like. So this is a Lua script that, you don't see that on my screen. How do I change to show my whole screen? Let me stop sharing and
you're
just
the technical
I'll just share my whole screen. That's going to be easiest. All right, you getting my whole screen there now?
Yep.
So this is a Lua script that was auto-generated from our KML instrument. So it's got our flight geography, our 400-foot AGL limited area, our 3,900-foot AMSL area, etc. So this is all auto-generated from our KML file. We can load that directly into the flight controller, and then a little Lua script reads that, and it's able to take appropriate actions. So we've got set up in this little Lua script, we've got things that say, in this particular polygon, we have an AGL limit of this, we have an AMSL limit of that, etc. So this allows you to basically do very, very complex fencing arrangements, both horizontal fencing and vertical fencing. And then the little Lua script can take whatever actions you've got in your operations manual, which might be a land or a termination or a whatever action you might need. So it allows you to do, really quite complex operations. All right, so back to the slides again. I'll just leave it like this because I'll be flicking over to demos in a minute. I think I'll pop across to a little demo now. So are you guys seeing my simulator screen now with an aircraft flying around?
Surely am.
You are?
Yep.
Great. Okay. So this is a example of a simulated run using the MAV proxy ground station flying one of the missions that we've been testing. And this is actually not got all of the elements we have on our full ground station. My home screen is much lower resolution than the screens we use in the trailer we have set up for our BVLOS operations. So we actually have quite a few other screen elements and graphs and things, but I've just minimized it down a little bit for use on my pathetically low resolution screen that I have here at home. One of the features you may notice is we actually have two maps up rather than a single map. That's because I like having a wide view. And you'll notice, for example, it's got integrated here, the ADS-B traces coming from Canberra Airport. These are live, so that's the real traces of the aircraft that are currently sitting out at Canberra Airport, but integrated into our simulated environment. And so if one of those flew across to be close here, I would automatically, it would start shouting at me about warnings about traffic, and it would highlight the aircraft in red and show us exactly how far we are from that aircraft, so we can start taking appropriate actions. That's all integrated into our automatic traffic warning and avionics warning system that we've got. You'll see this little warn OK up here. That's part of our automatic warning system. So if we get, for example, one of our motors fails, we automatically comes up as warning, propulsion failure, and we can then look at the details of which motor has failed and, decide what to do. This aircraft is a bit unusual in that even though it's only got 4 vertical motors, it can actually keep flying with 3, and it can continue in forward flight or VTOL. So we don't necessarily terminate the mission if we lose a motor, but we likely would tell it to come home, because if you lost one motor, you might lose another. Various graphs, your height above terrain is obviously crucial. So there's our height above terrain, which we're showing in meters there, and our 2 airspeed sensors and our ground speed. We've got, on this little window here, we've got a whole lot of extra data that isn't normally shown on an Ardupilot. So we've got, for example, our QNH altitude in feet. And this is to help inform our radio operator, Michelle. She's the one that makes sure we stay in touch with other airspace users. And so we have data showing up here to assist her. So for example, when she's talking to the tower or to other airspace users, they might want to know our QNH altitude in feet. So that's displayed there automatically, and our geometric altitude in feet. It also shows, for reference, our position. So it's automatically showing our distance in nautical miles of magnetic bearing from Canberra Airport and from the nearest point here. There's a Mount Stromlo, which is a trig station here. That's a an aviation point that people navigate by locally. And so it's got the distance in nautical miles of magnetic bearing from Mount Stromlo as well as from Canberra Airport, which assists Michelle when she needs to talk to somebody and say, they ask, well, where are you? Okay, we are currently 3.8 nautical miles magnetic, 316 degrees from the Stromlo VFR point, and that gives her instant feedback. Where she doesn't
Andrew, I might have to get you to start not cutting you off,
all right.
but we're going to have to start
fine.
wrapping it up at some stage soon. I could listen to you all day, but I do know that we're on a tight deadline, tight time frame today.
So this is what our FPV feed looks like. So we have that coming up automatically. This is a real FPV feed we run from one of our flights. And for the simulator, we have this little feed, which is like a simulated FPV feed. We don't tend to use that on the real flight. We use the FPV. That's probably enough, I think, enough for demo. This is what it would look like in Mission Planner. So this Mission Planner is the more widely used ground station. It's a very good ground station, very, very simple for simple operations, but for some types of operations, it may not be sufficient. You can see it's lacking a lot of the features that I showed on our setup. So I think that's about it. We should move on. Sorry for taking so much time there, Jackie.
No, that's fine.
I'll stop sharing now and hand back.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. And I now know for everyone that's watching today, now my comments probably make sense. I get off the phone call with Andrew and I'm like, wow. I still have so much to learn within the industry, and I'm sure you're feeling all the exact same way right now. For our next speaker, BVLOS comes in all different, shapes and forms. There are some complex BVLOS operations, but there are some simple BVLOS operations as well. So today we're going to, our next speaker is Jess from Whitehaven Coal, and Jess is going to look at the real world, how they use that on the mine site. She's been working with the BVLOS for the past nearly year, and been in the drone operations for the last, I think, since 2021. So welcome, Jess.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jackie. Those last presentations were amazing, so I'll see how we go with mine. You can see that. Can you?
Yep.
Okay, so like Jackie said, I am a survey technician working for Whitehaven Coal. I've been there just over 9 years, but stepped into a survey tech role about 3 years ago. I work for the Gunner Open Cut, so across two mine sites, Vickery and Tarrawonga. And as you can see there, the top one up there, you've got Tarrawonga and the bottom is Vickery. So just go through a bit of that. A little bit of an up-close picture of both of those coal mines. So why do we fly drones and how we use BVLOS? So the use of our drones in our open cut coal mines enables remote monitoring, surveying and inspection of the mine sites, improving safety and efficiency. BVLOS operations allows our drones to capture data over large areas quickly and efficiently, facilitating stockpile management, environmental monitoring and infrastructure assessment. The use of BVLOS has enabled us to minimise the turnaround time on our aerial surveys, ensuring our deliverables are done so in a timely manner, which has been amazing. It's been a huge improvement for us. I've just got some images there of our drones that we do use at our Gunner Open Cuts. So we've got our Mavic 3E in the bottom left corner, the Trinity F90, and recently acquired the Trinity Pro. So far so good with those ones. What we use it for, so we build our 3D models and aerial imagery of our operations to deliver to multiple stakeholders. So engineers use them for dig designs, pit compliance, volume calcs, things like that. Down the bottom, I've just popped the point cloud that we create from our aerial surveys in Pix4D after we process all of our imagery, and then the 3D surface we create as well. Can you see those images, I think? Okay. This one here is a Pix4D, so basically it's just a quick snapshot of the processing, midway through the processing. All of those little marks there are just our ground controls. So we have found that using BVLOS, we are flying a little bit higher. It is a little bit harder to see those ground controls. So we have had to make them a little bit bigger and incorporate a few more. Our geology department rely on us for high-wall mapping and scanning. So BVLOS has been fantastic for this reason. We can access areas that we couldn't normally get to physically. We can fly in there, capture a really good image, screenshot of what's going on in that area, and then bring it back to them without putting anybody at risk. So the drill and blast department, I think I've got it on the last slide as well, use our survey data to create their blast patterns. We also use it for high wall scans, so we can get in really close to our high walls and just give them a snapshot of what that face is doing, so then they can design based off of what they see there. Safety department use us as well for their surveys, so we can record things like emergencies. We don't have to go into an unsafe area now. We can fly our drones in and inspect that for them. We also use it for a lot of training reasons as well, so recording longer and a bit higher in the pit so we can capture an overall of what's going on. Just popped a few images there. So we've got an aerial image of the dams, so we can use them for dam inspections rather than going around to all 15, 16 dams in a day. We just fly in and check them all out. And then we've got just a snapshot of a 3D surface we've created with our BVLOS aerial survey of a rehab area. There are quite a few improvements we've noticed since acquiring the BVLOS. I won't go through them all, but I will just touch on some. So for safety reasons, obviously, we send that in to monitor hazardous areas and inspect equipment from afar for things like hot tyres. Data collection, so the drones collect the high resolution imagery and data. It provides accurate measurements, 3D models, environmental monitoring again. a large reduction in aerial images collected overall. So we were finding that when we were flying BVLOS, we were collecting up to 2,000 images at a time. With the use of our BVLOS, flying higher and a bit longer, we can actually collect around 200 to 300 images. So that actually cuts down our processing time and our delivering time by at least 24 hours. It doesn't affect the GSD of each image. We've noticed it's not terrible, which is good. I've included this slide as well. So this is just our operating conditions and limitations to be applied. So it just does discuss those boundaries we use, the red, green and orange boundaries we use for our BVLOS, which we did pop on our controller as visuals and also geofences when we do fly. Again, here we've just put the approval operation volumes provided. We use them as overlays with AVCRM, and when we create a job, we download them as KML or KMZs from our document library and display on our GCS or equivalent mapping display, so whether we use our controller or our laptop. Importing these, we also set a geofence and a ceiling height just so we ensure that we are flying within the required compliance BVLOS. Our BVLOS workflow, so this here just goes through the workflow that we follow. So with our flight planning, we create a job in AVCRM, submit and approve, usually done days prior, so we don't have to jump on during the day and quickly get somebody to approve a job and rush out and do it. So we try and do that days ahead. We ensure that our JSA is completed and relevant, and all authorisations are gained. So from landowners, airspace and CASA authorisations are checked. Our NOTAMs are raised and our stakeholder engagements are done periodically by our CRP, and our flight mission plans. With our pre-flight, we check our weather and our NOTAMs, remote pilot briefing. So if there's more than one of us operating, we have a quick brief as to the job requirements and what's going to happen during that flight. We do our pre-flight checks and we use the appropriate IAW procedure, radio calls, using our airband radio prior to our flights. In flight, obviously we don't have to watch the drone anymore, so we just ensure our flight path is monitored on whatever you're monitoring, so your controller or your laptop, during our flight time, and we monitor the airband radio the entire time. Our post-flight, so our RPA and our equipment inspections, and we sync our flight records with our DJI account on our controller. Oh, I think I missed one, sorry. And for our flight processing, so we bring everything back to our office, process our flight data as required, and then we jump on and finish our job in AVCRM using our flight data sync option. I think that is it for me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jess. That was like a whirlwind of information in such a short period of time. And you know, you really highlight, you know, BVLOS does not have to be large areas. You don't need to be, you know, flying, you know, entire coastlines or, you know, half of a state or anything like that. You know, mine sites can, you know, often be a few kilometres, but just adding BVLOS to that can really streamline your operations than trying to stay visual line of sight or running extended visual line of sight as well. So I get really confused with the Q&A and questions, and I can see Dylan's been typing back to everything. So I'm going to ask a few quick questions and then I'll get him to sort of ask any that's come up on the chat as well. My first one is for you actually, Jess, as soon as you're on. BVLOS Octa. So I know you didn't come from an aviation background or anything like that. You have been flying drones, visual line of sight for a few years. Talk to us about that BVLOS Octa experience and going to sit that exam.
Okay, so we had a bit of training with you guys actually for our BVLOS. So we didn't really know much about it when we first started hearing that we're going to be flying BVLOS. So going into it, we were all a little bit new. So we sat down, we ran, I think it was a 2-day course here in Canada. We sat down and learned all of everything about the BVLOS and then had to go and sit an exam in Tamworth, which was quite daunting. There was a lot. So you go over there and you sit in a little room, sit an exam and, yeah, hopefully cross everything that you pass. Once we completed that, we came back here. We ran through a bit of familiar on everything with the BVLOS and, yeah, had a practice flight and a bit more training on it, and then off we went.
Perfect. And just for everyone out there, so BVLOS Octa is, a qualification you can have on top of your remote pilot's license that allows you to fly beyond visual line of sight outside controlled airspace. If you would like to fly BVLOS in controlled airspace at the moment, you still would need an instrument rating examination pass. We're going to jump over to you, Andrew. So we're calling you Andrew, not Tridge, but and you did touch briefly on CASA came out and said that was okay. Do you want to talk to us about that CASA flight test? What was it like? How did you feel by doing that flight test with CASA?
So it was good. So they gave us a test instrument first. So rather than the instrument we were asking for was flying over quite a large area and flying up to some significant altitudes. So what they did to give us our sort of training wheels, they issued a test instrument which was limited to 400 feet AGL and just a small fraction of the total area. It included the takeoff area and just 10 or 12 kilometres in a particular flight corridor, which they knew was a fairly low risk area for us to fly in. And that was brilliant because that meant that we could do a whole lot of flights beforehand, basically getting our procedures right, making sure we typically had 4 people operating. So we had, I was the pilot in charge, then we had Peter Barker as the secondary ground station, we had Michelle on the airband radio, and then we had Ian monitoring the FPV feed and doing, the situational awareness for the aircraft. So we were lucky that we had, that number of personnel available to operate. And so we learned how to do, what they would call, I guess, crew resource management, working together, delegating tasks appropriately, and also making sure that, I would make mistakes as pilot in charge, and the others would pick me up on it. So Peter and I both did the Octa course, the one that Hover offered, and it was a brilliant course. We really learned a lot from it. Peter hasn't actually sat his exam yet, but he did the course. I sat the exam and got my Octa. But him having done the course meant that he was able to point out things that, you really should be doing this right now, which was great. And that gave us time to practice. So we did a whole bunch of practice flights under the test instrument. And then when he came out on the day, it was, we had a local CASA inspector from Canberra came out, and it lasted about 6 hours or so. He was out there, and he was sort of explaining what we were going to do. And then we did a flight, and he threw some various fail safes at us. He told us, okay, there's now a crewed aircraft coming in from this direction. So take the appropriate action, right? And so I then have to announce that, we've got this traffic coming in and that we had to take appropriate avoidance action on the aircraft. Luckily, we didn't have to terminate the aircraft, would have been unfortunate, but obviously he wouldn't actually require us to do that on a test. He had explained beforehand that in a test scenario, you don't have to actually terminate. Luckily, the expensive operation, but he also threw things like GPS failures and airspeed failures and other types of failures at us and make sure we handled those. And then we had one unexpected one where my laptop went crazy and we ended up switching to the backup GCS, as I mentioned before. So it was very good. We got some great feedback as well. He was very good at pointing out areas that we could improve. He passed us, but said this area could be a little bit better. And it was very, very good.
Yeah, no, perfect. And look, before I pass to Dylan to ask the next question, a question that I get asked all the time as well. So usually for a flight test, there's one inspector comes out. However, we do occasionally see, let's just say, a lot of BVLOS operations are moving to remote operations centre at the moment as drone in the box becomes more prevalent. CASA can make that determination. We have had times where they might send 2 inspectors out, especially if it's new equipment to the country or anything like that. So you may have, an inspector at the remote operations centre and then one on site as well. But, it really just depends on, I guess, on their day and availability and different things as well. Did you want to jump over to the next question?
Yep, so we have a few questions. We'll start with just how they came in. So, Andrew, this first one's for you. It comes from Matthew Ward, who will be taking over shortly as CDU's CRP. He's in agreement that the Griffin Pro is a fantastic aircraft that they've been using for about 18 months now. And he wants to ask about situational awareness. So he asks, how are you guys maintaining situational awareness and deconflicting with crewed aircraft in Class G that don't carry ADS-B, given that ADS-B is not required for VFR flight in Class G airspace?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And the short answer is you can't do a perfect job of it, right? With the technologies that we've got available in our particular aircraft, you'd be aware that there is various experiments around, audio and visual avoidance techniques, and we haven't got any of those on our vehicle, which means that if we're when we're, within a few kilometers of our takeoff point, we usually can hear other aircraft that are coming through, and there's a particular helicopter that tends to come through without ADS-B on it that we're aware of, and so we make sure we get out of its way when that happens. But when we're further out, then we may not be aware. If we see another aircraft, we've got a very good FPV view, high resolution, very wide view angle, and if we see another aircraft in that FPV feed, then of course we can take appropriate evasive action. But if they're coming up behind us, we won't see them. And so what it ultimately comes down to is that, CASA essentially applies big sky theory, where they know the density of traffic in a particular area, and they think the likelihood of an incident is low enough, and they're willing to issue an instrument. But there really is no guarantees. And if you were in an area with higher density traffic, then I imagine that you wouldn't be, issued an instrument like we have been, and instead you'd be required to have additional methods of avoidance, which may involve cameras or audio techniques or whatever. So, Dylan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah,
I will expand on that. So depending on the sail level you land on, there will be a corresponding percentage of aircraft that you must be able to identify through what we call TMPR, or Tactical Performance Mitigation Requirements. So at a Sail 2 level, which is what most BVLOS is in Australia, it's 50%. And CASA are currently satisfied that you can achieve this through aviation radio, good stakeholder engagement, the use of NOTAMs to pre-warn people entering the area, and through ADS-B, which, as we mentioned, is limited. I think the current number is sitting somewhere around 18% of aircraft. And not everyone turns it on. But as you go up, those requirements do become more stringent. So at Sail 3, it goes up to 75%. Some of the kind of proposed methodologies at the moment for identifying that is either if you're operating in a controlled environment, that identification requirement can maybe be moved off to you onto ATC. And outside of a controlled environment, you'd be looking at things like portable radar for the time being.
And do you know what? I don't know what I was thinking we could do BVLOS A to Z in an hour. We are going to just keep going past the time. So I hope that the people watching can still stay on. We've got a few more additional questions. But for those who do need to jump off, look, we really thank you for being part of this series and, really, being part of the drone and aviation community here, and taking these practices back to your organization so we can have a safer drone ecosystem. Also, a quick plug, I mentioned we'd turned 10 this year, so please follow us on social media. We actually have a lot of really cool specials and different things that I'm just going to throw out like I like to do over the coming months. So, please follow and hopefully there'll be some really great opportunities for you all. But we'll keep going with questions.
We do have a few to get through. So the next one comes in from Mark. What sort of range are you flying on any one mission? So Andrew and Jess, I'll get you both to answer that if that's okay, because you have pretty different applications. And Andrew, the range you're operating at is quite interesting, probably to a lot of people.
Sure. So our instrument allows us from our takeoff point to down, it's around 80, 90 kilometers, I think. I'll just measure it actually. So from our takeoff point to the furthest distance we're allowed to travel. So it's just over 70 kilometers. And which is quite long range. We haven't actually flown that far yet because we've only got our instrument fairly recently, and we're starting off with shorter distance runs for the moment. but that does mean they're quite long flights and over some quite challenging terrain.
For us at Whitehaven, we are flying up to 2,500 feet, so 750 metres high. And as you can see with my slides, we do have our boundaries there. So we do just fly our least boundary of our pits. So it's probably up to a few kilometres away from where we take off. We can cover the pit, I think, in about an hour max now. It used to take up to 4 hours to fly, but now we can do the entire area in about an hour.
That's awesome.
Cool. So I'm just going to finish off all the questions in the chat, and then I'll jump over to the Q&A tab. We do have a few. So we do have one question from Derek here around pricing guidance for managed service programs for docs, as there's no guidance about how to charge clients based on industry standards and around what the total cost in time to wait for approvals and cost for BVLOS approvals is. Jackie, that one's definitely for you.
It's not a hard and fast rule, but, you know, at the moment, because BVLOS up until today is still an area specific, we are pushing the regulators really hard to be more, you know, a large area of self-assessed application. So even if you are using an outsourced, you know, operator, they still need to go and get beyond visual line of sight approvals. So, you know, they've still got that time. It's probably something, Derek, that we can chat to offline of what I'm thinking the costing are. I don't want to give a hard and fast rule, because, you know, drone flying and managing that is just one aspect. You know, a lot of the, you know, the operators out there doing, there's some fantastic ones, but they're offering value adds, you know, all of the modeling, or, you know, the data collection and managing, or AI and things on top. So definitely reach out to me and we can definitely have a conversation on this further.
Yep. He also had a follow-up on recent CASA briefings regarding how the UTM system will work. Yep. And will all RPA from docs require ADS-B in and out?
Look, the FIMS program, you know, the UTM system, I believe there'll be some more announcements in the probably in the ARPAS and Australia Skies in Canberra next week, or the week after. It's still meant to, the first stage of the FIMS rollout is coming in November this year, but the first phase is just for automated approvals, very similar to what we've been doing for the last few years, you know, at Canberra Airport or Sydney Airport. The next phases are still not being given a dedicated time frame of, you know, those additional services that may help BVLOS operations. So this first phase they're releasing is auto approvals. There are some, you know, process and other things that they are offering as well, but that will also depend on the USS provider. So they have selected the first 4, and, you know, a lot of those additional things will depend on, you know, who you end up using as a software. They might add in, you know, ground population density data, or, you know, different data sources to help you with your planning as well. Cool. I think was that the statewide one as well. I can answer that super quickly for Luke. This has been a bit of a passion for mine. There's probably someone from CASA on this call too, so I might just be very diplomatic in my conversation. But this is needed. We need to move forward. We cannot wait for, you know, 4, 5 or 6 months for a new approval. Drone in the box is making, you know, operators scale. You know, people want to move to 100 sites, 200 sites. We can't continually, you know, put that in, like, so we can't continually wait for that. So there does need to be more trust for experienced operators. This might not be for everyone to start, but there needs to be more trust that, you know, if you met a certain risk level, that you can self-assess that that operation you're going to do is going to fall into what you've been approved for, like a SAIL risk 2. In a lot of the government working groups, and also for the ones that, you know, follow the CASA roadmap, it has been discussed that, you know, CASA are looking to introduce something like that, but the finer details have not been released as of yet.
So Robert has asked, wouldn't it make sense to give all BVLOS aircraft a signal colour to be easier to identify to other crewed aircraft? I will just touch on, with the introduction of the UTM and the FIMS program, further guidance around how broadcasting the information from the RPA will probably be developed and come down the line. As for right now, very few instruments, and certainly none that I've worked on, have allowed you to activate ADS-B out or any kind of transponder on an RPA without approval from ATC in the area, which is just quite rare and not really been required so far in that SAIL 2 environment. I do expect we'll see more guidance on that as we move into more complex operations, though, and as the UTM gets developed.
Yeah, look, also for everyone out there that, you know, follows different policy and things like that, obviously the roadmap for aviation, you know, was released, and that was on some of the pathways to mandate ADS-B. And I really think all of us as end users, we need to keep that messaging going. You know, every time you speak to the AUS or, you know, different industry working group members, you know, remind them the importance of this. Look, it is going to help with obviously BVLOS operations and safety, but at the end of the day, we only want it so we are safer. We aren't going to cause, you know, a collision with accrued air traffic, which will probably result in a loss of life. So, you know, keep that conversation going. You know, we've had different elections and different things, so priorities get changed. So we need to keep that at the forefront of the conversation.
Cool. All right, so jumping over to the Q&A tab, we have a few to get through. Jason, I just asked a while back if we could get the acronym for EOS there, just so we can answer your question when we get down to it. So if you can just pop that in the Q&A there, that would be great. But we'll start off with Brendan's question. So can you provide some indicative timeframes for CASA approval of an outside of controlled airspace BVLOS area? And also, what are the minimum requirements for establishing a drone in the box, say for a Dock 3?
I'll start with the wait times.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually something that CASA have got better of, is that intake of the BVLOS operations. There's actually now some control measures. So they're actually checking to make sure, you know, is the application complete? Does it make sense? Is all associated? And what that is doing, by making sure the applications are complete to start with, it's making when the inspector gets to it, it's a quicker review time, so they can actually turn over more. Although, you know, there is resourcing issues and there is, you know, pathways that could further automate these BVLOS approvals. At the moment, for an initial BVLOS, look, I probably say 4 months, but we've even seen them push out to over 6 months lately. Yeah.
Yep, and that's something that Tridge would probably have some thoughts on as well, is if you have a particularly complex area that might be outside of controlled airspace, but with controlled airspace sitting on top, you may spend a lot of time actually working it out with your inspector. And it's important to remember sometimes when your application is running for a few months or even longer, that they are trying their best to get you operational, to get you out there and get you flying as safely as they possibly can. And they are really very much on your side in that process. As for the requirements for establishing a drone in a box, say for a Dock 3 or any dock, in terms of operating remotely where you remove the pilot from the same geographical location of the box, you need to start looking at it from a remote ops point of view. So there are some complexities to that. For instance, we mentioned with SAIL 2, you need to identify 50% of that aircraft, and you typically do it through radio. So if you're no longer standing in the field holding a radio, you need to come up with a remote solution, something like the Skycom box that we produce. And you just need to think about, how will my level of risk change because I've now removed myself from the field? I'm not there to identify aircraft. I'm not there to clear the ground area before we launch, and then just start working through the control measures you can put in place to address those additional risks. Did you have anything to add to that? No, cool. Brilliant. So next one we actually did answer that on waiting between submitting and getting their instrument. So you're looking in a 4 to 6 month period for the queue, and then however long it takes you to assess. So Luke has asked, if you're flying a tethered drone BVLOS, so as the tether is doubling as shore power, can you reduce your GRC to 0 by saying the drone is inescapable from a signed or cordoned off area. So you can't reduce a GRC all the way to 0, but you can get it down to 1 if you're operating in a controlled environment. And the easiest way to think about that controlled environment is that you are in charge of who comes in or out. And of course, you have that strong containment of the RPA to prevent it from going outside as well, which a tether would absolutely do. Also, as well, strong geofencing would also potentially satisfy that. So you could get it down quite low, but it's important to remember your ground risk class is also assessed on the characteristics of the RPA. So if you have a particularly heavy RPA, you may still end up, with a final GRC number that is, a 2, a 3, or a 4, depending on the size of it. Next question, and this will be one for Jess, is at the Whitehaven site, were these completed with a DJI dock or with 4G equipped RPA?
Hi, yeah, so we have the 4G equipped RPA. We don't have a dock or tethered or anything like that.
Brilliant. And Jason, I haven't seen an update there, so if you just want to pop what EOS
maybe electronic line of sight? No.
That would typically be over EOS. Entertainment or sporting events, maybe?
No.
Like a highly dense area. I will just say that the density of your area will result in, if this is what you're talking about, a highly dense area like an entertainment or sporting event where you have, 10,000 people per square kilometre. It's not prevented per se. You just need to be able to make your case for mitigations, or if you have a very high sale level, you need to be able to make your case in the OSOs to get an approval from CASA.
Yeah, I know we've talked very quickly today on so many different topics and that. So, if you still got questions or anything, feel free to reach out. We're sort of pretty approachable people. Usually I like to have quite a long chat. So, feel free to reach out. We're happy to sort of answer any other questions. Was there any more?
So we don't have any more in the Q&A or the chat at the moment. Just double check I haven't missed anything.
Well, I might just sort of what I'm going to do first, and then, people need to jump up. Firstly, I really want to thank our speakers today, sharing your time and your knowledge. So really thanks to Dylan and Jess and to Andrew Tridgell as well. I really appreciate you coming along and sharing your knowledge. But before you all jump off, so if anyone has to jump off, feel free to jump off. We're probably going to stop recording as of now, but we will stay on and answer these questions as well.
Yep.